Okay, I'm reading the last half of chapter 22, I think. The last half of chapter 22 about Speak Dragonese, Return of the Heroic Heroes. Great were the celebrations in the hooligan and bog burglar tribes when they realised their heirs had been returned to them unharmed. The battle songs being beaten out by the war on the war drums turned to songs of triumph. The two great snaky lines of warships rang out with cheers, and the warriors fired their arrows into the air with joy, which incidentally is not a very safe thing to do. Someone could take their eye out doing that, but hooligans and bog burglars were not known for their common sense. Stoic hugged his son and said no words, but Hiccup knew what he meant. I love this picture of Stoic fast and his son there. Stoic, Big Booby Bertha said at last as she lifted her daughter onto her mighty shoulders in triumph. By way of apology, I would like to give you a little gift. Big Booby Bertha clapped her hands, and one of her warriors brought forward a gigantic shield. Waistline of Woden, exclaimed Fishleg, staring down at the shield. You realise what this is, don't you? It's only the shield of Grimbeard the Ghastly. Do you think that could be one of the King's Lost links? It was indeed Grimbeard the Ghastly's famous shield, taken in battle by the bog burglars many years before and held by the tribe as a trophy ever since. Perfectly round in the centre was a skull crowned by seaweed, around which waves and dragons chased each other in an endless circle. Snotlout's eyes gleamed. Snotlout was feeling extremely put out. Here was Hiccup turning up yet again, not dead, not drowned, and not eaten by sharkworms, and it didn't look like there was going to be a fight after all. But now he could prove he was destined to be chief, not Hiccup. Snotlout picked up the shield of Grimbeard the Ghastly and held it victoriously over his head. It was a glorious moment. Snotlout looked magnificent, standing there nobly or muscly intertwined with the last rays of the setting sun, blazing over the horizon and sending flashes of silver off the shield and into the sky. The watching hooligans, some of whom were not very sure what was going on, and all of whom were not very bright, assumed that Snotlout had saved the day in some way. He certainly looked good. They started shouting, "Snotlout! Snotlout! Snotlout!" And the bog burglars replied with, "Kamikaze! Kamikaze! Kamikaze!" "Oh, for Thor's sake," said Fishlegs, "I'm not having this happening all over again. This was nothing to do with you, Snotlout. You weren't even there, for Thor's sake. It was Hiccup who just saved our lives. Hiccup who had the clever plan, and Hiccup is the heir to the hairy hooligans. Push him, Fishlegs," advised Kamikaze from her mother's shoulder. Fishlegs gave Snotlout a big shove in the stomach. Ordinarily, Fishlegs would never have been able to push Snotlout over, but the shield Snotlout was holding over his head made him a little unsteady. He fell overboard into the water with an enormous splash. There was a bit of a horrified silence, and then Stoic Fast threw back his great hairy head and shouted out, "Ha ha 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 ha!" in a huge guffaw. The cheers of the watching tribes turned to great yells of laughter, for there is nothing they love more than a really simple joke where someone falls over or gets wet or covered in mud. So they laughed as long and loudly and rudely as only Vikings can, splitting their sides and bending over double and thumping each other on their hairy backs as the sun set on Saturday, in a spectacular display of red and pink and gold. Snotlout was pulled out of the sea by his father, Baggy Bin the Belly, still clinging onto the shield of Grimbeard the Ghastly, and even Snotlout was forced to join in the laughter so he didn't look like a bad sport. "Hiccup," said Stoic at last, wiping the tears from his eyes, "I have a present for you." Stoic led Hiccup over to the back of the blue whale, and there, being dragged behind by a rope, was the familiar sight of a small fat boat with a slightly wonky mast and a drunken wobble to the left. "The Hopeful Puffin!" exclaimed Hiccup joyfully. "Gobber dived down into the harbour and brought her up for you," beamed Stoic. "I mended a couple of holes for you," boomed Gobber, slapping Hiccup on the back. "We'll make a Viking of you yet. Maybe you and your Jagan Juiceless and Fish Eggs and Cammy Watsit here could lead us back to Burke in triumphant procession," said Stoic. "After all, it's not every day that the noble tribes of bog burglar and hooligans have their heirs returned to them." As darkness fell all around them, the islands of the archipelago turned from green to grey and then to black, and the Viking warriors lit the flares that hung along the sides of the gently rocking ships. The electric squirms flickered into life and danced across the ocean like little fiery squat barks, trailing tails of sparkly, dusty light behind them. The sea was as flat as glass, and the reflection of the full moon in the water made a flickering path of moonbeams leading all the way up to the distant silhouette of the Isle of Berk on the horizon. Hiccup and Fishlegs and Toothless and Kamikaze climbed on board the hopeful coffin, who seemed none the worse for having been down to the bottom of the ocean and come back up again. For weren't, and whatever stranger could observe that nighttime procession, they would have thought it odd indeed to see the progress of the Viking warships that night. For were not the Vikings supposed to be the masters of the seas, the greatest pirates and navigators the world had ever known? And now here were these two great snaking, flaming lines of hooligan and bog-bugler ships zigzagging wildly this way and that, turning round in circles and doubling back on themselves, laughing and apologising and cursing in the darkness. They were all following the lead of one tiny boat at the front, the hopeful Puffin, as she twirled and span and revolved in her own peculiar way across the path of the moon towards Berk. That's them going back to Berk. The island of Berk. Epilogue by Hiccup, Horrendous, Haddock the Third, the last of the great Viking heroes. Here I am, back where I started. This is Hiccup speaking as an old man. This all happened such a long, long time ago. But now I come to think of it, if I look around the desk where I am writing now, I can see things all around me that remind me of that time. The hook of Alvin the Treacherous hangs on my wall like a golden question mark. By the door rests the shield given me by the fat consul. I've taken that shield into battle with me all my life, much to the amusement of my friends. But instead of being circular like Viking shields, it is square in the Roman fashion. But then I have always been somewhat of a square peg in a round hole. Even the quill with which I am writing now is made out of a Roman golden eagle's feather that I found in my cell at Fort Sinister. I look at these things and what I remember most clearly is the moment when the balloon rose out of the jabber and hullabaloo of the prison at Fort Sinister and into the clear blue sky like a perfectly round bubble of happiness or a balloon of thought. I remember the quiet stillness of that moment, floating free of all care and worry, suspended magically in the endless nothingness of the air below and above us. I remember my child self looking down over the rim of the basket and seeing my entire world laid out beneath me like a map in a made-up story. For the first time I saw that the place where I lived and struggled and worried was part of an archipelago of staggering beauty. Hundreds of tiny green islands set in a shimmering blue sea. And suddenly I realised with such clearness what pinpricks we were in this ocean universe, what swaggering insects, what posturing amoebas. But size isn't everything, as I was always telling Snotlout. However small we were, and we should always fight for what we believe to be right. And I don't mean fight with the power of our fists or the power of our swords. That has always been the problem with us Vikings. I mean the power of our brains and our thoughts and our dreams. And as small and quiet and unimportant as our fighting might look, perhaps we might all work together like the numberless armies of Sigarastica and break out of the prisons of our own making. Perhaps we might be able to keep this fierce and beautiful world as free for all of us as it seemed to be on that blue afternoon of my childhood. Once my hand held the sword endeavour so strongly. Now that same hand is as brown and wrinkled as an old salt kipper as it writes these words slowly and shakily across the page. The ink splutters and splodges where once it ran so smoothly. Sometimes I forget what I was doing last Tuesday, let alone 65 years ago. But the winds will still blow when I am no longer here. The storms will still rage, and the forces of empire and oppression, be they Roman or otherwise, will still be waiting at the corners of the ocean. The fight goes on for the heroes of the future. And that's Hiccup and Kamikaze and Fishlegs in the balloon looking down on the archipelago below them. Hiccup realising how beautiful it was. But this This is the end of the book, but there's a sting in the tail. The sting in the tail is this. Surely that must be the end of Alvin the Treacherous. Last seen dropping from height into a heaving mass of sharkworms. And surely there must be a happy ending at last for all our Viking warriors, large and small. But as with many happy endings, there is a sting in the tail. In this case, unknown to everybody, in the confusion when the balloon fell out of the sky, one of our heroes was stung with a single drop of poison from the terrible tail of the venomous ballpint. And as everybody knows, the sting of the venomous ballpint is absolutely always fatal. Which of our heroes was unlucky enough to be stung? Look out for the next volume of Hiccup's memoirs, How to Cheat a Dragon's Curse. And that's the venomous ballpint saying, I don't like happy endings. They are too neat, too nice. I like a little spice in my stories. So this is not a happy ending. It is just toodaloo, see you soon, which is Dragonese, while the story continues. Oh, so somebody's been bitten by that venomous ballpint. Prophecy of the King's Lost Things. Hiccup has found the Roman shield. I told you he would. He now has 3 of the King's Lost Things. Will he discover them all? We need to find out in How to Cheat a Dragon's Curse, where we'll also find out who was bitten by that venomous ballpint. And can they be saved?